Have you noticed how many times a day do you take the phone without even realizing? Or how do you feel restless when you have nothing to do, consume or do? Carl Jung, the revolutionary Swiss psychologist, understood that these apparently harmless compulsions reveal something much deeper about the human condition. For Jung, addiction is not simply a matter of weak will or lack of discipline. It is an eloquent symptom of a soul that screams asking for attention, of a self that has been systematically ignored in favor of the external demands of the social person. The truth is that it is rarely said aloud is that we live in a culture that teaches us to flee from ourselves from very early. When you were a child, you learned that certain emotions were unacceptable, that certain aspects of your personality should be hidden to be loved and accepted. This initial fragmentation of the psyche creates what Jung called psychic division, a painful separation between who you really are and who you feel that you need to be to survive in the world. It is in this crack where addiction finds its fertile terrain, offering temporary relief for the existential pain of living disconnected from your own essence. Jung observed that every addiction has a sacred message of the unconscious. When you miss on social networks for hours, when you are looking for constant validation of others, or when you cannot be alone with your own thoughts, your psyche is trying to communicate something fundamental, that you have lost contact with your center, with what he called the self, that interior totality that is your true psychic home. Addiction, in its perspective, is not the enemy to overcome, but a symptom of an spiritual thirst not satisfied, a deep desire for reconnection with how sacred lives within you. What makes this understanding so liberating is that you completely transform your relationship with the fight. You are no longer a broken person who needs to be arranged, but a human being in the process of individuation who is receiving important signals from his psyche about what he needs to heal and integrate. Your addiction, however painful, is pointing out exactly where you need to direct your attention, towards the parts of yourself that have been exiled, repressed, or denied, and now cry for recognition and integration in your conscious life. We live in a time of chronic dopamine deprivation and paradoxically obsessed with constant stimuli. Jung did not know the neuroscientific details we have today, but his understanding of the psyche brilliantly anticipated what we now know. When you disconnect from your true self, your brain desperately seeks ways to fill that existential void. Dopamine, that neurotransmitter linked to motivation, anticipation, and reward, looks severely compromised when you live in a state of constant psychic division. Think about your childhood for a moment. How many times did they tell you to shut up when you expressed intense emotions? How many times did you learn that being good meant suppressing authentic parts of your personality? Jung understood that this early emotional suppression not only damages self-esteem, but literally fragments the psyche, creating what he called complexes, dissociated parts of personality that operate autonomously in the unconscious. When you systematically repress your anger, your sadness, your creativity, or your spontaneity, these energies do not disappear. They become shadow and seek expression through symptoms, including addictive behaviors. Dopamine depletion you experience is not just chemistry, it is existential. When you live disconnected from yourself, when your life is dominated by a person who does not reflect your true nature, your brain loses access to natural sources of motivation and purpose. Jung observed that human beings cannot prosper living a lie, even if that lie is socially acceptable. Your psyche knows when you are betraying your essential nature, and lack of energy, apathy, and compulsive search for external stimuli are ways in which your unconscious protest against this betrayal. What makes this understanding so powerful is that it points to the true solution. It is not to artificially increase dopamine through more stimuli or distractions, but to reconnect with the authentic sources of psychic energy that Jung identified in the self. When you begin to honor your true emotions, when you allow repressed parts of your personality to emerge to consciousness, when you align your external life with your internal truth, natural motivation returns, not as an external drug that you constantly need, but as an inner source that renews itself because it is connected with all who you really are. The genius of the Jung approach for the healing of addiction lies in its understanding that you cannot cure what you do not consciously recognize. While most approaches focus on abstinence or behavior control, Jung was directly to the heart of the matter, the need to make the unconscious conscious. For him, all addiction is fundamentally a failed attempt of psychic self-regulation, your psyche trying to balance internal forces that have been systematically ignored or repressed. When Jung spoke of integration, he was not referring to an intellectual process, but to a deep transformation of total personality. Imagine your psyche as a house where you have key-all rooms because they contained emotions, memories, or aspects of yourself that you considered unacceptable. Addiction is like living alone in the living room, using substances or behaviors to avoid listening to the noises that come from those closed rooms. Jungian healing implies having the courage to open those doors one by one and find face with everything you have been avoiding. This integration process requires what Jung called transcendent function, the ability to maintain the tension between opposites without collapsing to any end. In practical terms, this means learning to sustain both your pain and your hope, both your anger and your love, both your fear and your courage. Addiction, in many ways, is a collapse of this transcendent function, an escape towards unconsciousness. When the tension of opposites becomes too intense, healing implies developing the ability to remain present with the whole range of your human experience. Jung also understood that dreams, symbols, and synchronicities are crucial messengers in this integration process. Your psyche is constantly trying to communicate what you need to heal, but these messages often arrive in a symbolic language that requires attention and contemplation. When you start paying attention to patterns in your life, to the symbols that appear repeatedly, to dreams that impact you deeply, you start accessing the wisdom of your own unconscious. This inner wisdom, which Jung identified with the self, becomes your most reliable guide towards the whole, and therefore towards the freedom of the addictive compulsion. The work with the shadow is perhaps the most powerful tool that Jung bequeathed us for the healing of addiction. Your shadow contains all the parts of yourself that you have rejected, repressed, or judged as unacceptable. And paradoxically, it also contains some of your greatest treasures and vital energy sources. When you start asking your addiction what you are trying to communicate, when you approach it with curiosity instead of judgment, you start discovering the legitimate needs that you have been trying to satisfy in a dysfunctional way. Imagine for a moment that your addiction has a voice. What would I tell you? Maybe you are exhausted to pretend to be someone you are not. What desperately need to feel something real in a world that feels increasingly artificial? What do you long for? Connection, creativity, adventure, or simply the right to exist without having to constantly justify your you? The work with the shadow implies listening to these voices with compassion and finding healthy ways to honor the authentic needs they reveal. The work with breathing becomes an invaluable tool because it connects you directly with the emotional energy stored in your body. Jung understood that psyche and soma are inseparable, that repressed emotions become body tensions, and that freeing these tensions can facilitate deep psychic liberations. When you practice conscious and rhythmic breathing, especially in states of emotional vulnerability, sensations, memories, and emotions that your addiction had been anesthesiating often emerge. This process allows you to process and release stagnant energy, creating space for your natural vitality to emerge. Symbolic rituals offer a powerful way to communicate directly with your unconscious. Jung observed that the psyche deeply responds to the language of symbols and significant rituals. Something as simple as lighting a candle and looking at you in the mirror with the intention of really seeing who you are, or writing a letter to the part that fights with addiction, can open communication channels with aspects of your psyche that they have been operating in the shadows. These rituals are not superstitions, but psychic technologies that facilitate integration and healing to levels that go beyond rational thinking. The individuation, the central concept of the entire work of Jung, represents the process of becoming who you really are. Not who others expect you to be, not who you think you should be, but who you are in your deepest essence. In the context of addiction healing, This means that the goal is not simply again to be the one before addictive behavior, but to evolve towards a more true, authentic, and integrated version of yourself. Your addiction, however painful it has also been a teacher who has shown you exactly what you need to heal and integrate. Creating a life that nourishes the soul requires making conscious choices that feed your authenticity instead of your social person. This means constantly asking you, this decision brings me closer to or moves me away from my inner truth. It can mean changing career to follow your true vocation, establish clearer limits in relationships that drain your energy, or simply allow you to feel and express emotions that you have been repressing for years. Jung understood that when you live in alignment with yourself, life becomes naturally more satisfactory and significant, reducing the need to seek satisfaction in external sources. The transition from stimulation to meaning is fundamental in this process. Our culture is obsessed with constant stimulation, more content, more experiences, more intensity. But Jung observed that what the soul really longs for is meaning, purpose, authentic connection. This may mean replacing passive entertainment consumption with the active creation of art, music, or writing. It can mean changing superficial conversations for deep dialogues about what really matters. It can mean cultivating practices of silence and introspection that allow you to hear the voice of your own inner wisdom. Perhaps the most liberating thing is to understand that relapses are not failures, but messengers. Jung saw all psychic symptoms as communications of the unconscious, and this includes setbacks in the healing process. If you experience a relapse, instead of punishing you, you can ask yourself, what is trying to tell me my psyche? What need are I not honoring? What part of me needs more attention and integration? This perspective transforms each challenge into an opportunity to deepen yourself. Knowledge and accelerate your individuation process. The way to the totality is not linear. It is an ascending spiral where each apparent setback leads you to a deeper level of understanding and integration. What we have explored together through the wisdom of Carl Jung reveals a fundamental truth. Your struggle with addiction is not a personal failure, but a sacred call towards the whole. Jung taught us that when we make the unconscious conscious, when we integrate our shadow and honor the authentic needs of our soul, the compulsion naturally loses its power over us. Your addiction has been a severe teacher, but also a guide that has pointed out exactly where you need to direct your attention to heal and grow. What if this exploration about the Jungian perspective of addiction resonated more deeply with you? How is your own individuation process manifesting? What messages are trying to communicate your psyche through your patterns and struggles? Share. Down. Your story matters and can illuminate the way for others that are sailing this sacred territory of personal transformation. If this content touched something deep in you, be sure to subscribe to the channel and activate the notifications. This is a space for deep thinkers, for soul seekers, for those who are tired of pretending and ready for the real work of becoming who they really are. Like if this Jungian approach offered you a new perspective on your own healing day. Remember, you are not broken, you are becoming. Your way to the whole is unique and sacred, and every step, even those who feel like setbacks, is taking you closer to your true home, your authentic and integrated self.